The SAT reading section is 5 passages. You have 65 minutes to do it, which works out to 35 minutes per passage. The first passage will always be a fiction passage, and then those next 4, somewhere in those next 4, there is a historical passage, usually a political topic, and 1 to 2 social science passages, 1 to 2 more sciencey, hard science passages. And one of those final 4 is always a dual passage. So you have passage A, passage B, and then the questions will ask you about both. So in that 13 minutes that you have per passage, what I typically recommend, at least as a place to start, is to try to read the passage in 3 to 4 minutes and then leave yourself 9 to 10 minutes to answer the questions. So obviously a lot more time answering questions. And the reason for that is that you are probably going to go back to the passage for every single question, probably. And that's not a failure of your reading. That's a good thing to do because you might as well use the time that you have to confirm your answer. So what it means is that you don't need to do a super detailed read when you read. A 3 to 4 minute read is a quick read, fairly quick read, but it's not a speed read, it's not a skim, but you're also not memorizing the passage. So you need to do a reasonably fast read, enough to get the main idea of the passage. That's really the number one thing that you want to come away from the passage with. So one test that you can do after you've read, just ask yourself, what did I just read? What is this about? And if you can sum it up in a sentence or 2, you're probably good to move on to the questions. If you're having trouble doing that, you may need to go back into the passage and just do a super quick skim and remind yourself of the whole arc of the passage, what the thesis was or what the main idea was. And there are ways to do that that I'll talk about in another video, so you can be as efficient as possible in that effort. So another thing when you're reading, and this is helpful with getting the main idea, that little introductory paragraph at the top of the passage, it's not really part of the passage. If it's like for a fiction passage, it will tell you the name of the book that it came from, or if it's a science passage, it will tell you the name of the paper that it was taken from. That stuff can be very valuable. Sometimes it's not useful at all, or a historical passage will give you some kind of historical context that is sometimes very relevant for knowing who the characters are in the passage and the issue that's being discussed. So again, so not always useful, but sometimes extremely useful. So that means that you always have to read it. So usually it's just a sentence or 2. So give that a quick read. And so again, that can be very helpful because that can tell you, if you know the title of like the science passage you're reading, then that can give you very quickly, you know what you're about to encounter, because usually those titles are pretty literal. The title of a fiction passage may not be that useful, but could be. All right, and so also, when you're doing reading for the main idea, it means that you don't need to retain or even understand every tiny little detail. Sometimes in the harder science passages, the language can get pretty technical. And in the historical passages, the language can be a bit archaic and pretty dense. And it's okay to have a paragraph where you feel like, I didn't fully get that. As long as you understand the main idea of the passage, the author's main thesis, it's okay to kind of gloss over those details, because you're going to come back to the passage when you answer the questions. Because when you get to a question that asks about that part of the passage, you're going to go back to that part of the passage and deal with it then. And it's better to do that, number one, because by then you've read the entire passage, so now you know the full arc of the passage. But when you go back, the question is giving you something specific that you want to get out of that part of the passage. So it's giving you some specific task that you're going to complete. And that's a lot of times that's a lot easier to do than just what does it all mean. So wait until you get to the questions before you sort out every tiny little detail in the passage. And so for answering those questions, really the number one thing to do for answering those questions is to pretend that they are not multiple choice questions. So you can physically cover your answer choices at first. And so read the question, think about it, think about what you know of the passage, and probably you're going to go back to the passage. The question may direct you to a specific paragraph or something, or it might be a more general question, and you may need to go skim what you remember as the relevant part. But basically, try to answer that question without using the answer choices. So you want to have your own idea of what that answer should be. So just remember, those answer choices that are there, they're not there to help you. The SAT doesn't want you to get the question right. It's not giving you little hints in the answer choices about what question is right and wrong. The SAT wants you to get the question wrong. Those questions are there to trick you and trip you up, and all of the wrong answers, they make sound as appealing as they possibly can, and they make the right answers sound as unassuming as possible. They make it sound as wrong as possible. So the best way to see through that is to know what you want the answer to be. And so don't even look at them if you can. Obviously, some questions are structured in a way that, or written in a way that it's not possible to do that. You need to consider the answer choices right away. But for most of them, you can do this or some variation of this. So you go back to the passage, think about the passage, come up with your own answer, and then go to the questions, the answer choices, and see which one of those sounds like what you came up with. So a couple of things you're doing. Number one, you want to have your own relationship to the text. You want to have your own understanding. It's not the test, not the SAT sort of putting an understanding in your head. You want to get your own understanding out of it, have your own relationship to the text. And number two, you want to build trust in yourself that you are able to do this, that you're able to read something and comprehend it and answer questions about it. And you made it this far in school, you're definitely able to do that. So have faith and build that confidence. And that's really the best way to keep the test from getting in your head and tricking you, is to know what you want the answer to be. So there's plenty more to talk about on this section, but hopefully as an overview, that's a good place to start, and I hope it's been useful.